Welcome to the Be Here Now Guest Podcast. This series features a collection of teachings and conversations centered around mindfulness, spiritual growth, and living a life in balance. Each week, our diverse network of guest teachers and hosts offer up wisdom and practices from a different spiritual path and perspective. If you would like to support this podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/donate.
Hello, and welcome to the Ram Dass Fellowship live stream satsang. We're thrilled to come together again from around the world as we deepen into the teachings of Ram Dass and Neem Karoli Baba with all sorts of amazing wisdom keepers. I'm Jackie Dobrinska. I'm the Director of Community Outreach, Education, and Inclusion for the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation. And you all are the Ram Dass satsang. In these times, community is so important, and spiritual community is where we find a place to feed our hearts and souls, a place that we go to help us remember the deeper truths and practices, which can be really easy to forget in these times. So that's what we do on these monthly live stream calls, as we come together to remember. Before we begin tonight, I just want to tell you a few things about how we're about to proceed. Our topic with David Nichtern is What's Love Got to Do with It? We can do a little song and dance in the background if you'd like, the Tina Turner song. We've got 75 minutes together, and we'll do a meditation. David will speak for a while, and then we'll do some live audience Q&A. So whatever platform you are watching from, feel free just to type in your questions at any time. They'll get fed to me, and we'll try to get through as many as we can in our evening together. So with that, I invite you just to take a moment and get into your space to ground in, recognizing that we're in sacred space when we come together in satsang with hundreds and even thousands of people around the world, this web of hearts and souls through space and time. So some of you might want to light a candle to bring some intentionality to the space, or just simply feel the breath in your body and your feet on the ground, and breathe deeply together. And touch into that loving presence that's always in your heart. And from that space together, we welcome David Nichtern. He's a senior Buddhist teacher, a meditation guide, and an Emmy award-winning composer and musician. He was one of the original American students of Trungpa Rinpoche, and he has crisscrossed with Ram Dass for decades, from the 70s up to the last few years, and being involved with the Maui retreats. He has a podcast on the Be Here Now network called Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck. And he calls himself the first cousin of the Bhakti community, and has produced several albums with Krishna Das and frequently plays guitar with him. So pretty amazing human being. So with that, let us all give a great big welcome to David as we look at what does love have to do with it.
Thank you so much, Jackie. As I described for this evening, I'm calling myself a walla from another mala. So, I do feel a very strong connection with this community. And of course, it overlaps to a certain extent. We have a lot of students in the Dharma Moon community, which is the Sangha that I've sort of created with some friends who are cohabitating these two sanghas. And really right from the beginning of my involvement with Buddhism in 1970, I met Trungpa Rinpoche at a yoga studio in Boston, where I was going to Berklee College of Music at the time. And he came and gave a seminar there, a workshop called Work, Sex, and Money. So not far off from the book I wrote, 45 years later on a similar topic. And the main thread of that was, even at the time, was that all these elements of life are meant to be integrated and respected properly. And so he right away started a presentation that the separation of the kind of spiritual arena and the secular reality were not two different things for him. And he really took that point of view all the way through his life and all the way through his teachings. So that's a really important part of my, the legacy that he left for us and the legacy I'm trying to leave going forward. So I added maybe a piece. I'm not sure that this piece is in it, which is creative expression. So, I was already a professional musician when I came into this Sangha. It's obviously been a major thread throughout my life, and it's crisscrossed throughout some amazing times, which I think some of the people in the in the satsang here have lived through these times also. But I was in a bluegrass band with Jerry Garcia living in San Francisco, and I was going back and forth to workshops with Trungpa Rinpoche, and then you playing with Jerry Garcia in the Great American Music Band. So you can only imagine just how colorful that situation was. And I think the people who experienced that and also who knew Maharaji live and who knew Trungpa Rinpoche live are unique in a way, and their experience is very valuable. So lately, we've been talking about it some more than I usually do. I'm not a very nostalgic person, so I like to keep things in the present and kind of contemporary. But I've found that a lot of students are coming around to meet in their own way Trungpa Rinpoche, and I think that's similar. People want to meet Maharaji. And of course, when you talk about that, they're not talking about just that person's individual existence, but their atmosphere. I have students in Japan and they talk about somebody's atmosphere, which is such a great way of saying it. And that atmosphere lingers arguably for a long time. So we could say, for example, the atmosphere of the Buddha is what's lingering 2,500 years later. And that is what we call in Buddhism the mind transmission, mind to mind. So, of course, we heard the words and we, have certain formal ways of connecting, but the mind transmission is the essence of the communication from these great masters, enlightened beings forward. And I feel like just to pay my respects to Ram Dass at the moment, that he was a holder of that mind transmission lineage from his guru. And he was able to transmit that simple understanding of a wakeful, present awareness, which is the golden thread that goes through all these teachings. So, and I like to say also that, his famous "Be Here Now," I've adapted that a little bit via my friend Maria Muldar, who, when I said "Be Here Now," she said, "Or as soon as you can get here." So that consideration. We can't always, get here right away. So, but we're all working on it. And there's a feeling of path and journey that we all share. And the Sangha at this point is such an important vehicle for all of us who are trying to hold some kind of torch, hold some kind of light, some kind of brilliance, some kind of virtuous qualities in what is described fairly universally in these traditions as somewhat of a dark age. But in the Vajrayana tradition and the Shambhala tradition, dark age is a powerful opportunity to express your courage and your confidence and your ability to maintain your dignity and maintain your equanimity even when the boat is rocking, as it has been pretty much lately. So I thought that tonight, first of all, I'm just very honored to be here, and I wanted to share a few, remembrances of Ram Dass and also of some meetings between him and Trungpa Rinpoche and some conversations I had with Ram Dass recently about those days. And then also I have in mind a little tiny Dharma talk that will be a combination of where I think these two traditions overlap in an intriguing way, which is KD and I talk about this all the time, and it's whether it's 0, 1, or 2. If you're into numbers, is everything 0? Is everything all 1? Or is it two, or some combination of those. So there's some very powerful metaphysical ideas that are expressed in terms of the relationship to non-duality, duality. And I thought with this group, we could really go there a little bit for a minute. And then when we have time to discuss, we could, open up that conversation. Of course, you can get lost in metadata and metaphysics. And what one thing that is in common between these two traditions is that they really trace back to the Mahasiddhas in India. And, way before the monastic tradition in Tibet, for example, which is probably how most people experience Vajrayana these days or recently, there were these yogis in India who, when you trace back the roots of the Kagyu lineage, for example, which is Trungpa Rinpoche was in the Kagyu lineage, it goes back to Tilopa, who was just a crazy yogi living on the banks of a river eating the fish heads that the fishermen threw away. That's the root of our tradition. So all the formality, all the, elaborate expositions of the principles emanate from this very direct kind of experiential fountain. And, it merged later on with the monastic tradition. And then that became the vehicle that a lot of people experienced it with. But it's not really the root of the tree. The root of the tree is the notion of wakeful engagement with the exact environment that you happen to be in. And that shifts your whole feeling about your experience. And it's a simple thing. I used to love, Ram Dass would just say, I am loving awareness. I thought, he's giving all these people this beautiful transmission. There's nothing to learn. There's nothing to do. So in the more developed parts of the Buddhist Vajrayana, we really give those kind of simple instructions. And the great teachers that I studied with, I was very fortunate because Trungpa Rinpoche was a cornucopia, and he brought over many famous Tibetan masters, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche and 16th Karmapa and many, many others. And we got to hang out with those people. We got to, take teachings with them, but also drive them around, sit around. I took Karmapa 16 to Disneyland. I mean, we were sitting in the Pirates of the Caribbean right next to him, and he took my glasses up and tried them on, and they worked for him. These seem like incidental little moments, but they're not. They really carry the imprint of the great blessings of the lineages. So these experiences of being together in this kind of way, even though it's virtual, we are tasting that right now. We're tasting that right now. It's a wonderful thing. Then, in the spirit of playfulness, really, and also sharpening, one's understanding, there's a great tradition of these different lineages kind of rubbing against each other, sometimes in a kind of formal debate, sometimes in a more informal setting, and illuminating sort of Dharma on the spot. There's some really great stories about that. And that tradition was carried on by Ram Dass, who was, I don't know if it was the last words I said to him or not, but, we would have that period of time at the end of the whole week in Maui. And I was going to Maui to play with KD, twice a year for the last 8 or 9 years. So this was a big part of my life and really a joyful part of it. And I just said to Ram Dass when we went up to receive the mala, I just looked at him and said, "You throw a great party." And, it meant a lot to me. And I had so much respect for him and for the community. So I just wanted to share that with you all. And I know we're all feeling the same way about that. So, just a little local color first. The first time I met Ram Dass was, I think, 1971 or 2. And it was back in the days of a place that came to be known as Karme Chuling, when Karmapa 16 renamed it, but it was Tail of the Tiger for many years. I was the director of Karme Chuling for 2 years, from 1978 to 1980. But back then, it was a farmhouse, really, with a kind of modest shrine room upstairs in the farmhouse. And so we would either go into town or pitch a tent for the Dharma conferences. And Rinpoche would come and give talks. I'm going to guess there were 50 people, something like that, 60 people. Very colorful. So to one of those, which was on the teachings of Don Juan, strangely enough, interestingly enough, Ram Dass came, and Bhagwan Das also came, and Ram Dass just sat right at Rinpoche's feet. And I don't know if that may have been the first time they met too. I'm not sure. But I remember really vividly, I was sitting there and Ram Dass was kind of pranaming, and Rinpoche was a total hippie in those days. He had completely joined, who we were. He didn't cling to a sense of identity that would have given him a kind of alienation effect from the rest of us. And so he was smoking cigarettes and drinking sake and, dressed in blue jeans and a T-shirt. It was astonishing compared to what he became later in terms of reintroducing the formality. But he was sitting there and he was talking and he was smoking a cigarette. And Ram Dass kind of was like this in front of him, and he was sort of still bald in those days. And Rinpoche took the cigarette and just kind of flicked a little bit of ash on the top of his head. It was so cool. I mean, it was like a blessing. And also a kind of spontaneous comment. And one thing about Trungpa Rinpoche is that he he had absorbed the entire formality of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, like as if you had drank, when you drink that stuff for before you get a colonoscopy, you have to drink like a gallon of that stuff. He had consumed the entire tradition by the time he was 13. It's hard to understand this and the level of training. And then he led a party of people, 300 people out of Tibet under the Chinese invasion. And then he became a refugee in India and then England and then the United States. So he didn't have any platform when he came over here. He had to create that. And his way of doing that was and I recommend this to everybody, when you meet people, meet them on their territory, meet them where they are, and I'm very trained in that because those days we were a bunch of lunatics, basically. And I mean that in a good sense, the kind of eccentric, and so was the Ram Dass crowd. But he, coming from a totally different culture, was able to assimilate very quickly ours and really start talking to us in our own language, in our own vernacular. It was an incredible time, so colorful. So then, maybe 3 or 4 years after that, Rinpoche started really training his students more classically, and we had a 3-month seminary where you would go away for 3 months with him, and he would basically teach you Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana teachings in a very thorough way, which was unusual for the times. You can't even find such a thing now. There is no such thing anymore. And after that, he invited His Holiness Karmapa 16th, who was one of the great luminaries. I'm sure all the old Bhakti people had met Karmapa. He was really a luminous being. I mean, it was hard not to see the sacred world when he walked into a room. It was just like sunlight, sunshine, and so kind, so ordinary. So when Rinpoche brought Karmapa over, this was the head of his lineage. And that was the turning point where he was up for 4 days in a row, no sleep, just getting ready and showing us how you prepare for a teacher like that in this tradition. So all of a sudden, all of us hippies were wearing shirts and ties and jackets. And that was the beginning of a much more formal relationship with our teacher, and more classical in some senses. So I'll cut to maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We got invited to have dinner with Ram Dass at that Japanese restaurant in Maui that everybody goes to. And we were sitting there, and he looked at me and says, were you one of those mafia guys? And it really made me laugh because he was talking about all of Rinpoche's people were kind of like looking like they're from, some kind of law firm or mafia. And it was kind of a kind of sweet moment. And the fact is I kind of was one of them. So it's that kind of touch point into the history of all this is so ordinary in a way, but it's so rich. And I felt like Ram Dass, I really want to offer my respect, because Ram Dass was very kind to me personally in these last couple of years. He's kind to everybody, but he wrote a blurb for my first book, Awakening from the Daydream. And he was, I think, appreciated the music that we were making. And, it's the end of an era for us right now. So we have to adapt. When the guru passes away, that's a big transition for a sangha. That's really a big moment. And sometimes people look and they say, well, what are we doing together? We don't have any connection at all, because the light of the teacher was pulling people together, So, but I want to share one other thing, which is that in the Tibetan tradition, they say when the teacher dies, there's a phrase for it. They say, he or she enters the action. Isn't that a cool phrase? He or she enters the action. And meaning their qualities are more pervasive, more accessible than when they're just in that one form. And that's been my experience. And I think many people experience that with Maharaji, that he's in the action. He's in the fabric, the fiber of the situation. So before I get into the Dharma piece of this, I just wanted to share one story about Maharaji, who I never did meet in the body. But I'm very close with KD, and so I've shared his world in a lot of ways. And I've as Jackie mentioned, I produced a bunch of his albums, and we've worked on music a lot together and hanging out. I kid around. I say that KD is my only friend who I can watch the Super Bowl with, and then at halftime talk about Bardo states. We have a kind of unique friendship in that way. It's very earthy and cosmic and special. And I was working on KD's record, Kirtan Wala. And we worked hard in the studio. We had a lot of fun. Big choir, and at the end of it all, we had about 90 or 100 minutes of music. You know how those songs go on for a really long time. A friend of mine from LA, CJ Vanson, came up, said he wanted to come up and throw $20 onto the stage and say, all right, go to the bridge now, a musician friend. So these songs are long and they're accelerating in tempo, not so easy to edit. And I said, I've got the problem now of needing to cut this down to 74 minutes and 30 seconds, which is the amount of time you can put on a CD. You can't, if you degrade the quality if you go longer than that. And I just went like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. So I don't know what possessed me, but in my mind, I said, okay, Maharaji, you don't know me, but I work for your boy KD here, and I've heard a lot about you, and I don't want to ask for anything for myself. I just want one small thing. Would you time the CD for us? Would you make it come out right? Let me just do the music. Let me make it feel right. I'll make the edits where they feel like they should go. I'll put the songs together in the order they feel like they should go. And this is the honest truth. I just did that part of it. At the end, we had the session in Pro Tools, and we looked up at the clock, and it was 74 minutes and 30 seconds to the second. So you can make whatever you want out of that, but it's a true story. So this world is, obviously a magical place. What we call in Buddhism is ordinary magic. We don't have to trip out on anything like that. It's magic that we're communicating like this. It's magic that where all the organs in our body are still working. It's magic that we get to share our hearts and minds in this way. So every once in a while, there's a little, we call it a tendril, auspicious coincidence. And one other story with with KD was I was working on one of his albums, and I had a dream, that I was, while we were working on it, that we were in the studio, and I kind of just, in the dream, I just my chest expanded, my heart expanded, and I started to kind of levitate. And in the dream, I became Narayana. I can't explain it. I don't even really know particularly all that much about Narayana. I know it's in the chants and so forth. I know something about it. And then somebody asked me, "Who are you?" And I said, "I am the one who knows who I am. I am the one who knows who I am." And that was, I fact checked it with KD. He said it's okay. So there's a lovely feeling to all this, and we're going to have to regroup, obviously, and figure out how we all get together. Meanwhile, the virtual reality, I know hundreds and hundreds of us are together. I would like to send all my good wishes out to everybody out there, and hope you're safe and happy and healthy. And there's a chance for some transformational energy right now with the virus that we can tune into. And so therefore it's an interesting situation. It's dangerous, but powerful. And so I wanted to talk about that part first, and then shift to more of a kind of Buddhist framework. And also by comparing it to the 1 and 2, So, of course, Maharaji and KD and this community say all one, Sabak, right? All one. So that's a beautiful thing to say, because it means, all the different things are connected. But of course, the Buddhists like to parse things down to, not to just pick at it for no good reason, but, to see clearly the depths of a statement like that. And so there is a Buddhist school that says it's all one. It's called Yogacara, and that's the Zen schools. So you might hear some of your Japanese Zen friends saying it's all one, and meaning a similar thing, or big mind, they say, But there's another school in Buddhism called Madhyamika, which is middle way school, which, according to the historical records, kind of won the debate over the all one school. And what they say, and this is kind of a brain twister a little bit, is they say not 1 and not 2. So of course, what does that mean? What does that leave you with? And the idea is that if you fix your mind too hard on oneness, that becomes a kind of strong reference point. So actually, you create dualism by doing that. And on the other hand, if you just focus on the dualistic aspect of it, you miss the integration piece. So there's a kind of notion of interdependence. So you could say, for example, a good example I use is the banyan trees in Maui, right? They drive a branch out, and then the branch drops another root system into the ground. For those of you who've seen it, it's pretty phenomenal. There's one in Maui that is 2 acres wide. Is it one tree or many trees? Not one, not many. So it's that kind of interconnectedness or interdependence is what's emphasized. And the idea of having a very fluid way of looking at things so that you don't fixate on either affirming or denying. And that's kind of the Buddhist way, in a way, to sharpen prajna or discernment, and which is different than intellect, just intellectual speculations, really using the acuity of your mind to see into the nature of things. And that's a very important part of Buddhist practice. So it's not 100% faith-based or devotion-based. But in the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition, there is tremendous devotion and faith to the guru, and that we have in common with the Hindu tradition. And so when I would go to Maui, I would say, in the guru sense, I have an affinity with the devotion, the bhakti community, and the notion of how important the guru is in direct transmission lineages. And then maybe philosophically, there would always be some Buddhist teacher there, who are from Theravada or Mahayana schools, and I would have that kind of understanding in common with them. So myself, I feel a little bit like I can connect with either environment. But even in the Vajrayana system, there's this is really throughout Buddhism. There's this notion that I wanted to talk about a little bit tonight, and then we could, jam on it together, is called the two veils. So it's always good. We Buddhists, we have a little package. We can go, we pack a lunchbox of little Dharma thingies, and then you can open it up and, have a picnic lunch on some topic. So the two veils is a classic teaching, right? And this is what obstructs us. This is what obscures us from understanding reality properly, from experiencing it fully. And what they're called is conflicting emotions. Everybody knows about that, right? It's not emotions, conflicting emotions, kleshas. Like we get stuck between one feeling and another contrary feeling, and therefore we can't really see the situation clearly. Anybody who's been angry, jealous, proud, or dull can relate to this. And the other veil is called primitive beliefs about reality. That's the best translation that I heard of it. Primitive beliefs about reality. Kills me. I love that, because what does that mean? Well, what they are is there's two of those, so there's another two there. Nihilism is one, eternalism is the other one. So this is a joke, an ongoing joke with me and KD, which, he calls me, the nihilist formerly known as Nuji, and I call him an eternalist. What it means is that you've solidified one of those two extremes, at least from this perspective. One is you've solidified the notion of emptiness, which is nihilism, which a lot of people think that Buddhism is, but is not accurate, not correct. You think that the notion of the non-substantiality of any kind of characteristic could translate to voidness, but it's just openness is what it is. I mean, and probably be closest to, in a way, almost quantum physics, where you see that things break down into smaller and smaller parts, and then finally you're in space and energy form. So the nihilism is negating and becoming kind of solid in your negativity about what exists, or the deities or whatever. And on the theistic side, you've substantiated them to the point where they become quite solid and real, but also that solidifies your existence too, right? Because if you are projecting something that's out there and that's solid and real, that means in some sense the observer is solid and real too, and defining their relationship in that way. So this is a really fun thing. And the last thing I'll say about this, and then we can just do a little practice together, is at Maui, I'm getting reclaimed thinking about Maui, because this was a really special thing that we shared. This is no small thing. And I met a lot of great people there. And one of them is my sweet friend, Duncan Trussell, who I know all of you know. And he's got such a sharp mind. I really appreciate it. And discerning mind. And fearless in a way. So I took an immediate shine to Duncan. And we've been talking about Dharma for years now, since then. And I even appeared as a cartoon character on his TV series, which was about as far out as he gets. I was myself as a cartoon teaching his character, which was an octopus meditation. And it was a real dialogue that we had, actually. So it was kind of sweet. And I was doing a podcast or something like that with Duncan in my room. And we were talking about the 6 realms, which I wrote a whole book on called Awakening from the Daydream. And I was saying that all of the realms are impermanent in a Buddhist perspective, including the Devaloka, the God realms, the realm of the gods. So I was saying that basically the gods, even though they live a long time by our standards and really are not clocking into the same diurnal rhythms necessarily. He said that he was saying, well, are they impermanent? I said, well, in a Buddhist sense, the occupants of the Devaloka are also impermanent, and they're also sort of trapped with an eternalistic perspective in that they think their existence is going to go on the way it is forever. And that's just a very pleasant version of the rest of the wheel. So he's chewing on that, and then he has to leave. He said, "Oh, I got to go on stage now. I'm on with Raghu and a bunch of the other folks." And I didn't go. I stayed in my room. But later I heard, from everybody that Duncan was, got up on the stage with, and Raghu will remember this story if he's there. Well, Nichtern said that Hanuman's impermanent. What do you think, Raghu? Is Hanuman impermanent? And that was the outcome of the whole thing. It's such a sweet memory. But, in my teacher's world, we'd say, your guess is as good as mine. That's how I'll kind of end that conversation. Your guess is as good as mine. But we could keep an open mind, awake mind. So that's mostly what I wanted to say. And I thought I could just lead a short meditation together. And then we could in about 10 minutes, we can open the gateway for discussion, questions, answers, comments, and you're all welcome to chip into that. So, what I want to say about meditation is, unfortunately, that one word has become a blanket word in the West for as if everybody who's saying I'm meditating is doing the same thing, and they're not. So I want to introduce this idea in Tibetan. One of the words, umbrella words for meditation is gom, in Tibetan, G-O-M. And it just means simply to become familiar with something. So you're putting your attention, your awareness onto an object. It could be compassion, it could be loving kindness, it could be a deity, it could be, it could be the mind itself, the experience of the mind itself. And so there are many, many thousands of kinds of meditation. But what they have in common is two elements. One is called shamatha, or placement of attention. You put your attention onto a particular object of awareness. And the second is called vipassana, which is like discovery or insight, developing clarity about the nature of the experience. So I call them focus and discovery. That those are two elements of it. You focus in a certain way, and then you leave room for experience to arise and for you to understand the nature of it and become familiar with it. The most common one is just becoming familiar, and it's become a rage in the West. Everybody in their Antilles is doing mindfulness meditation, and they're emphasizing the stability part. The calming the mind down, settling the mind, which is great. No problem. But of course, it inevitably will lead towards people learning more about themselves. So we emphasize a kind of taking a gentle approach towards it, and some kind of kind approach towards oneself. Because in that still space, you're gonna, it's not like you dissolve into a bubble. You are there as whoever you are, and with whatever experiences you've had. And we're not trying to repress those or suppress them or eliminate them. Really not even trying to change them, but change our relationship to them, which is now more aware of the fact that we're sort of caught up in the discursive mind and kind of rotating our tires there day after day after day, and some break into the kind of moment of, wakeful attention in the moment, or being here now. And this is the most common kind of meditation that we're going to do. And it's the foundation for all the other practices. So if there's no mindfulness, you can't even chant, really. You forget what you were doing. So the first step is just simply taking a body posture that is going to allow you to experience uplifted, dignified sense of physical existence. So we call it taking your seat. And usually you can sit on a chair or on a cushion or kneel. And you can just place your hands down on your knees or thighs, which is a very simple kind of approach, mudra it's called resting the mind. And then ground yourself properly. Then feel an uplift in the spine, so that we say lengthening your spine. We say the back is strong and the front is soft and open. Shoulders can come back a little and then drop. And then chin parallel to the floor. And jaw relaxed, mouth slightly open or lightly closed. And the classic form of this exercise, the eyes are open with a soft downward gaze. You'll see Buddhas like this. There's this kind of look. And there are variations on that, including eyes closed, including eyes looking into the horizon. So don't worry about that kind of, it's not one way is right and another way is not right. It depends on what you're cultivating. The reason we keep the eyes open is so that you can remain cognizant, conscious of where you are. Because we're not trying to get somewhere else, right? Being here now. It's interesting, that word here isn't emphasized as much as now. But being here, being here. So we're not trying to go into some altered state, as appealing as that might feel. We're also not dwelling in, kind of anxious states. We're coming back to a sense of physical presence. So all the sense perceptions are open, but kind of softened. Okay. Then we have second step of the instruction is to just gently place your attention and awareness on the experience, the feeling of breath. And many people would say, well, I'm counting the breaths, or I'm thinking about the breath, or I'm labeling it. So the way I learned is just feel the breath. You don't have to add a conceptual baggage to it. Just feel yourself breathing. It feels very nice, actually. And third step is a correction. The mind wanders off, Inevitable. Look, we're busy people. We've got busy lives. It's not an attempt to rivet your attention to the breath in a hardcore way. It's a light remembering. I was just thinking. So you can say the word thinking, if you like, to yourself, and that allows you to bring your attention back and place it on the breath. Just touch in on it. Some of us are way too hard on ourselves already and trying so hard to do it perfectly. When you've been practicing for many decades, you go, I give up. I can't do it perfectly. So doing it becomes more just show up for practice is more the point at that point, right? So we can go down hard or we can go down easy. And, I'm recommending, giving yourself a little bit of a break in terms of the attitude, but no break at all in terms of the discipline of doing the practice. That's a healthy combo. So we could just sit like that for 5 minutes, okay? And do it your own way. If that's not comfortable for you, it's okay. Do your own way. But we could just sample this simple mindfulness practice together for 5 minutes, and then we'll turn it back to Jackie and open up for conversation, okay? So I'll ring the bell in 5 minutes. So, Jackie?
Yes. Thank you, David. It was really amazing and such a succinct summary of the paths of Buddhism. Preston, how you brought that all together. So there's several. So just letting everyone know that feel free to type your questions in, and we'll have conversations weaving in your questions. So in that like succinct summary, you talked about impermanence. You talked about wakeful engagement and faith and interdependency. And the title of this is "What's Love Got to Do with It?" What's love got to do with all of those things? How do you describe it?
Yeah. So I wonder what the etymology of that word "love" is. Do you know?
Core. No, that's courage. I don't know.
La coeur in French.
Yeah, that's courage, right? Heart.
No, that's heart.
That's heart. And but I don't know. There's so many different forms of love that we can talk about.
Yeah.
To agree for that.
Well, it's I'm a simple person in a complicated apparition. So to me, love is something you feel, and it's the reason that I like music and songs and stuff is because you can express it without explaining it. You talk about the footprints of love, what the imprint of it is on you, what it did to you, how it messed up your life, how it changed your life, how it transformed your life. So I know love is a big, big word in the satsang community, and it's a big, big word in Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And, you could easily say there's the kind of love that's kind of relative, relational. And, if somebody falls in love with somebody else, and then there's issues of who's doing what to who, and it kind of like can lead to a lot of confusing situations for sure. And then there's the kind of love that is releasing into a feeling of surrendering to things the way that they are, mm-hmm. and opening. So when we talk about love in the Guru tradition, which I think is in common, there's a feeling of surrender that's actually, letting go of your sort of, shallow narrative out of a feeling of tremendous affection for some being, some quality of being. And I like falling in love. I've written a lot of songs about getting kicked out of love and stuff like that, and even made a few bucks from it. So, I mean, we talk about the human realm, and there's all that activity there, and people, I met this person, I met that person. But at a certain point you go, well, you're going to meet them again. Mm. And they're going to just, whatever karma you have with them is going to not, until you process it, is going to be there. So I feel like the close relationships we have in this life are karmic. You meet people and you go, wow, I know that person, I'm going to do something with that person. But this other kind of love is unconditional, I would say. It's not relational. It's not based on causes and conditions. And maybe it is the heart and center of the whole experience because it's such a strong field of radiation, and it's such a universal experience. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm just rambling on that. What do you think?
What does love have to do with it?
Yeah.
Well, going back to these different forms of love, right? There's the passionate love. There's the deep love of friendship. Playful love, love for everything. I think it's been in our culture, love has been really gotten confusing through all the messages we get, especially like romantic comedies, right? Like lustful, like love. But I think love has like, it doesn't bend, right? Like it's this deep, steadfast, force like gravity. Like that's that unconditional love that isn't moved around by the wind.
Yeah. It reminds me, Jackie, of a story, of course, when a teacher tells a story, it usually has, it's not just like, something like that happened to me. I had a car like that myself once. It's got kind of impact. And Trungpa Rinpoche told a story about his guru was Jamgon Khantrul. And you have to understand, he was raised from the age of 2 to his mom lived outside the monastery. And actually, he reunited, with her at times outside of the monastery. She would come in, but he grew up in a kind of highly developed monastic situation. And his guru, Jamgon Khantrul, was just at one point said, was explaining some things to him, and he just said, "Do you love me?" He just put it to him. And I think when you say that to somebody, you're giving up your cookies. You're just like, you're laying it out there, and you're vulnerable as hell at that moment, And that's how we like him. We want him raw and naked, That's what we're all doing this for. We're not doing it to put on more and more layers of whatever. So yeah, I think when you say it in that way, you are actually opening up quite a bit.
Yeah, I also think it's the love relationship in this world, like finding our way through to love with faith and all these other things. It's a kind of Bardo's.
Oh yeah, Bardo is a great concept. Does everybody know what a Bardo is, you think?
No, why don't you say it? Why don't you?
So it just means in between. Mm-hmm. We think of things as like landing on, we're crossing the stream. The stream has rocks, stones, and we land on the stone, and that's our experience. But what about going from one stone to the next? There's this in-between state, which is super important in the Buddhist way of kind of relaxing the grip of the mind on, on kind of fixated kind of approach towards the objective world. You taste the in-between. You taste the Bardo. And we're all going there according to the teachings. After we physically die, we're going there whether we like it or not, because we won't have this big stone in the stream that's called your body. And your mind is going to go, where the hell am I? What's going on? And they say the experience is very vivid, like in a dream, very lucid. And you can't really manipulate it as easily. So it's we train to recognize the in-between and to relax a little bit more. Don't panic, So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of questions that have come through. So I'm going to start asking them.
Okay.
What do you do if you feel like you've reached your lowest point? I've been at my highest spiritual point before, but it took so much effort and struggle to get there, and I just end up down again.
Yeah. This is such a deep, is there the name of that person?
There's not.
Not. Okay, that's okay. Whoever you are, you know who you are. And we all can relate to that in any case. So I'm going to refer back to, Trungpa Rinpoche coming back here in the early 70s and addressing this very genuine community of people who are looking for spiritual paths, and we didn't really have any that that were native to us, so we were looking around. And he looked at the situation. He wrote a book called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which is a classic. I still tell people, if you really want to taste the mind of Trungpa Rinpoche, read that book in particular. It's very seminal. And the idea that we're using the spiritual technology to feel better, quote unquote, to elevate our mood is actually, it could be understood to be materialistic in a certain way, because you could take a pill to do that, or you could eat a meal to do that. So I would recommend to our dear friend there, whoever that person is, make friends with yourself, however you are. And we say in Zen, they say sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. And I text my students that all the time. If you have a good experience, great. If you have a bad experience, great. We're not meditating to get high, because it's not going to work, because you're going to crash. And so if you can make friends with yourself the way you are and accept, build a bigger field of acceptance for yourself, then you get equanimity, which is a much better flavor than feeling good. Equanimity's really got a different quality. It's sort of more expansive. But I don't know if that helps that person or not, and I hope it does.
Would it help to potentially, like, compassion? How in that accepting of the ups and downs? How does compassion?
Oh yeah, because compassion is the way a mother loves a child. They don't think, well, like if you were your own mother, you wouldn't say, "Oh, you're having a bad day. I don't like you." You would say, "Come here, sweetheart. I'll take care of you." And also, if the person was a little bad, you don't have to judge them too harshly. So, I think if we could take that attitude, like what you're saying, compassion towards ourselves, this is not so easy to do, but maybe at least you have the view. You see, in Buddhism, we say the view comes first. The outlook comes first, then you apply the experience. So the view is to make friends with yourself, either up or down, and not to think of one as better than the other. It's a hard thing. It's
to go against the grain a little bit to do that, because I think
no doubt
to go the other way. This is from Michael. He says, "Hi, David, sending lots of love. Should I be busy trying to work out specific ways to live, such as what to eat, when to practice, etc., or should I just focus on how each moment makes me feel?"
Yeah. Well, first of all, who am I to tell you what you should do? I mean, I humbly decline to I appreciate the fact that you think that I might give you good advice, and I'll try my best in that regard. But I think separating out some elements of the we could dictate outer forms, what you eat, what you dress like, and stuff like that. But I think in our tradition, you work more with the inner part, the mind, and that takes discipline. That is the habits that we have. This samsaric engine tends to loop and repeat and repeat and repeat. If you don't have some kind of intervention in the form of a practice or something like that, I don't think it's that easy to be here now. It sounds like, well, duh, but it's it takes practice of some kind of, whatever your practice is, Michael. You should find a tradition and maybe work with teachers and the community, and then you have some kind of ground underneath that whole experience of trying to stabilize your mind in that way. It's helpful. It's a helpful thing. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, we say. Take refuge in those three amazing assets. So, and good luck. You can do it, Michael.
Y'all need it. Luck and love. So Jared, it looks like Jared asks, what was your personal experience with Trungpa Rinpoche's methods of crazy wisdom?
Okay, Jared. Well, first of all, crazy wisdom is not a method, actually. And it's interesting expression. It is a traditional expression, in case anybody thinks somebody made it up. That's not the case. And what Rinpoche used to say in the Tibetan language, it's really wisdom crazy. In that order, the wisdom comes first, and the wisdom is so strong that it doesn't, necessarily bow to conventional mind and conventional forms. So everybody has crazy wisdom, in that regard. There's every parent has some kind of crazy wisdom. You could say, I'm just doing this, I'm raising this kid by the book, but then you have to somehow lean into the experience. So I think crazy wisdom is just a notion of wisdom that's so deep that it doesn't have to manifest as kind of obvious conventional forms. And you know what? Here's the funny twist about Trungpa Rinpoche, and nobody will know this after this older generation dies, because it's all going to be rumor and hearsay. He was very conventional Buddhist. He was a classical Buddhist in a lot of ways. He transplanted the entire classical Buddhist canon in English with a team of translators working for 20 years. Of like all these teachings. You go to study with another Tibetan teacher, you have to do it, and you have to do it in Tibetan. You don't even know what you're saying. So he was, in a way, a kind of he had an avant-garde element to him, but he was also he was the classicist in a certain way too. So my experience of him was that he was very accomplished on many levels. That was my main experience of him. Wow, this is an accomplished person here. And then I also never saw him be unkind, although I saw him be direct. I never saw him be unkind in a gratuitous way. Other people might have other experiences. I can only speak from my experience. And also, we had a lot of fun. That's one part of crazy wisdom, is you think spirituality is supposed to be this dead, archaic thing that you're resurrecting with mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a corpse. And his thing was very alive. So I think he wouldn't have had the students that he had. I don't think anybody would have gone there if he was just, all classical. I wouldn't have been there. I needed more living energy. But he did blend that with the classical tradition. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, that meeting you where you are. Jamie asks, when I feel my heart open, I feel grief and sorrow for the impermanence of life, and I have no mental story about it, but all I do is cry.
I'm sorry. That's like Tara. That's like Avalokiteshvara. They just see all the misery and suffering in the world, and it breaks their heart. There's a famous what's her name? Baby?
This is Jamie Wolf. Yep.
Oh, Jamie. Oh, Jamie Wolf. Okay. Hi, Jamie. So one of my favorite deities in the Buddhist canon is thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara, which is the Avalokiteshvara is the bodhisattva of compassion. So this is a being who really embodies the compassionate love that you were talking about earlier, unconditional love. And he or she, it's different traditions, is either way, is looking at, looking at what's happening right now. For example, you look at it, you go, it breaks your heart. There's no way to look at somebody putting their knee on somebody's neck on public television for 8 minutes and watching a human being suffocated to death. If that doesn't break your heart, you don't have one, and you should get one sooner than later. And this is in every direction you look. Some version of this. These kids coming across the border. It's not just extreme situations, but regular people who are having a hard time with their lives. And there's people who are depressed and anxious all over the place and stressed out. So when Chenrezig saw, I'm saying Chenrezig, which is the Tibetan name for Avalokiteshvara, saw this, I'll say he for the time being, his head, the tears came down, his head just cracked open from the heartbreak of it. And he ended up with 1,000 heads in 1,000 directions and 1,000 arms. And so it gave that breaking of the heart gave way to an expansion of his capacity to be compassionate in a wide variety of situations, which is what the 1,000 arms, almost tirelessly compassionate. So this is my model. I just want everybody to know that 1,000 arm Chenrezig, that's the Scheisse, as we would say in Germany. That's the Scheisse, and we have this in us. So I think for Jamie, our friend there, see if you can go all the way into it and come out. Don't get stuck there. Don't mope. See if you can, do like Chenrezig and extend your arms out and just help out. And also, then the other part of it that's powerful is seeing the emptiness of all that, because it's not a solid thing. People are suffering, but they're also Buddhas. They have tremendous capacity, and they're also in flux states, so they can access some of that. So part of the compassion in Buddhism, we say compassion and emptiness are the two things that go together, compassion and emptiness. So don't get stuck anywhere with a fixed kind of heaviness. It can really energize you. You could feel very awake from it, actually.
It reminds me of Ram Dass talking about how do you keep your heart open in hell, and then there's another lecture of him talking about how do you decide what to give to. There's so many needs, and just pick the one where you're called. Yeah.
How do you keep your heart open in hell? That's sort of like a title for something. It's pretty good.
Someone wrote also that a quote from Mark Tennyson, quite sure that emptiness is different than nothingness. And you had just talked about the emptiness.
Yeah, and remember we talked about nihilism as being one of the primitive beliefs. So nothingness would be like the primitive belief of nihilism. Emptiness just means there's room, there's space. Things are not clogged up. There's a vast open quality to things that is not conditional. It's not conceptual. But it is groundless. And that was when somebody asked before, what was the feeling with Trungpa Rinpoche? The groundlessness was a big part of the feeling sometimes. I'm not in a place here where I can just put on a routine here. This person's doesn't really care about the usual shtick that we do. So it could be a feeling of like, I just had the rug pulled out from under me, but it wasn't because he was doing something, it was because he was not doing something. You just had enough space to hang yourself.
That space. There's this great conversation of Ram Dass and Joseph Goldstein talking about emptiness and love being very similar, because there's the letting go of the solidity that you've been talking about.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Amy asks, she says, and you talked about this in the last question, in these times of amplified racial injustice, do you have any advice for practicing love and compassion to those who wish to do you harm or spread dangerous and harmful rhetoric?
Oh, that's such a good question. Powerful. That's when you get into like, wow, is this stuff just people talking about it and making a comfort zone out of the view of it? I guess if I was talking to Amy, I'd want to hear what she said first. It's not that kind of forum, Amy, but if we're ever in the same space, bring that up again and let's have it be a real dialogue, because I'm not sure I know any more about it than you do, to be honest. Yeah. So, talking to Amy, that, she probably has my guess is she has some insight into that herself, and she should follow.
Mm-hmm. Someone else asks, what about hate? In a world where there's so much hate, how do we respond, see it, recognize, relate to it with love?
She's saying, is somebody saying the whole thing?
This is someone else, but asking sort of a similar question.
Well, what was the question though?
What about hate? In a world where there's so much of it, how do you respond to it, see it, recognize it, relate to it with love?
Oh, okay. So that's two questions, which would be, how do I do it? And then how does that person do it? And how could anybody do it? So again, these are these things where, there was 3 or 4 things since we're, invoking Trungpa Rinpoche and tonight, there's 3 or 4 things he just said so often. It was almost like a mantra. He said, your guess is as good as mine. And it wasn't dusting people off. It was not that quality. Mm-hmm. But, I think this is something that when we get around to it, we realize that we're not talking about strategizing enlightenment or imitating it. You got to find it in your own experience where we're using guidelines, maybe some guideposts. So there are I would say to the person coming back to method, because there is a possible way to answer that question that's based on the methods of the Mahayana path, and particularly what's called Lojong. So I would say they could look into the Lojong deck, which is a series of slogans about how to exchange oneself for others. Mm-hmm. And if they're transformative, and you do take on burdens of other people and their confusion and anxiety, and you swap your tendency to accumulate your own sense of good vibes, you give up the good vibes and you take on their dilemmas in a way. And and there's a lot of method to that and specificity to it. But it's not so much strategizing it; it's just recognizing it, and then you make the swap. And there's a practice called Tonglen that they could look into. Tonglen.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a good practice if you want to explore that.
Yeah, and I love what you also said about your guess is as good as mine, because it reminds me what you said in the beginning around when the guru leaves the body, it's more available, it's more dispersed in God guru self, right? They're finding that wisdom coming through us seems like a big part of what that is about.
Yeah, we didn't get to talk about God or gods. It's an interesting thing. Even in Hinduism, is pantheistic, really. So we're Westerners. We come from a monotheistic tradition, but all these other traditions come from pantheistic traditions where there's lots of deities all over the place. So that's a whole nother, we have to have another podcast for that at some point.
Yeah. It looks like we might go a few minutes over because we have lots of, we're not going to be able to get to all the questions.
Okay.
I'll ask 1 or 2 more.
Okay.
So would you be willing to talk about working with anger in a skillful way?
Yeah. Wow. Great question.
It's from Franklin.
Who is it?
Franklin.
Yeah. Well, so anger is, we have in Buddhism a 3 jhana system that evolved over centuries. 3 vehicles. So the Hinayana, or the narrow vehicle, is kind of prescriptive about maybe not engaging those things which are harmful. It would be equivalent to ahimsa. Don't do the things that are harmful. Don't cause further harm. So anger would be something maybe just hold back if you're getting angry, and don't create karma out of that. Don't don't make a mess, and don't cause harm for somebody else or yourself. Then in the Mahayana tradition, there's a little more expansive attitude towards, like what we said, exchanging self for others. And the feeling is that emotions and emptiness kind of co-arise from the same, vast space. So, for example, you could just simply see there's more space when you're angry than you think there is. Mm-hmm. You feel triggered and you're going like, oh, God, I got to, but there is space in there because, you could maybe even slightly artificially just recognize that the situation is potentially more spacious than you're allocating for it, which, count to 10. Where did that come from? What am I supposed to do with the anger while I'm counting to 10? Well, you're just giving it a broader kind of meadow to roam around in. And then in Tantra, we say the kleshas are the wisdom itself. It's a transformative approach. You say the anger is actually a kind of intelligence that's gotten distorted. So if you think about the enlightened dimension of all those kleshas and the transformative possibility, anger is really just, being accurate in a situation. And, somebody's hitting a child or something like that. You just go right to them. You say, stop that right now. That's kind of, but it doesn't have any aggression in it. It doesn't linger or cling, and you're not repressing it so it doesn't explode later on in rage. You're able to communicate with that energy in a more open way. So that can be very tricky, particularly with anger. And you can always go backwards through the yanas and just go like, okay, wait a minute, chill out here for a minute. And, that's perfectly legitimate. So it depends, if you feel you can work with it more intelligently, you try. But if it's getting out of control, you can kind of just go towards a more disciplined approach towards not having to express everything that you feel in just blurt it out. But that's a general view.
That's helpful. So earlier you talked about Buddha Dharma Sangha and hanging out with Sangha. And Jay Gannon asks, what makes a healthy Sangha?
Oh, you're right, Jay. It's such a tricky thing to do, but you could think what makes an unhealthy Sangha, and then don't do that. Sort of a, kind of literal approach. So I'll tell you what some of the things I understand very, very briefly. I think too much dependency or codependent kind of energetic, where people rely on the secret handshake aspect of it and kind of, the winky aspect of it, and we're the ones who know and they don't know, is often a mask for insecurity at an individual level. So the way Trungpa Rinpoche described his Sangha is like using the metaphor of dominoes, that you should space the dominoes far enough apart. In other words, each person should have their individual integrity. So if one of the dominoes fall, it doesn't just go right around the room. And you see that in unhealthy Sanghas. One of the dominoes falls, the whole thing falls apart. In a healthier situation, each person's capable of carrying forward on their own. So it's a kind of a connectivity that doesn't become codependent. And we all know, you can use the Western language for that. We all know what that looks like. Mm-hmm. We're basically, not feeling so secure about our own existence. So we're tracking into a group in a particular way that mutes our own individual intelligence. No real Buddhist teacher worth their salt would advocate that, as far as I'm concerned. That would be a dead giveaway in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. We could talk about all of these topics in depth. But I'll just ask one more question.
Yeah.
This is from Jimmy Ring, who's saying, looking back on your experience with Jerry Garcia now, what can you say about his playing in terms of spirituality, being here now, and your personal journey?
It's so interesting because it's a flicker, a moment in time that, as I said, it really coincided with, going back and forth with studying with Trungpa Rinpoche. And the guy that I was really connected with was David Grisman, who was a mandolin player that a lot of California people know to this day, one of the greats of all time. We have that expression, GOAT, great of all time, greatest of all time. David, and Dog is his nickname is the mandolin player who just set a whole new trend in kind of Americana music. And he had the band with Garcia, and then I joined it at a certain point for a while. And so it's interesting to me that I only know of one picture I can find, because we didn't have selfies in those days and stuff like that. I wish, but we opened a Grateful Dead concert, which was an unbelievable experience. 100,000 people, at a stadium. And our little bluegrass band came out and played the first set. And with him playing, he played banjo and I played guitar. So that was interesting too, because he was known as a guitar player, but his Jones was to play bluegrass banjo. That was his get off point. And he was good. He was a good solid ripping bluegrass banjo player. And I think he was happy when he was doing that, because he didn't have to be the Mr. Grateful Dead, and it was a kind of a jam kind of situation. So I thought of him, and that's the only time I knew him. I didn't stay in touch after that. I know, not that long after that, he had kind of some downward spiraling with, various things that people know about. So I think, my impression of him was he was a pretty happy guy. And kind of peace, a kind of sweet, but smart, but happy, kind of easygoing would be what I would say. It wasn't like being around a tense person, he was fluid and floaty. That's my memory anyhow, in any case.
All right, I just have to ask one more.
Yeah.
I hope that's okay. What is the Buddhist, and this sort of circles back to the first question in the title of this, what does the Buddha have to say about love?
Yeah. What's love got to do with it? Wouldn't that be funny? We had everybody in the team was doing that before we went on the air here. Well, let's see. Let's get to the rest of the lyrics.
Does the Buddha and Tina Turner go hand in hand here?
Well, they do. You know that, right? She was a Buddhist. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Namyo Renge Kyo. She was a chanter. Big time, famous Buddhist.
Right.
Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? It's a good question. I mean, if you have a heart, it's going to get broken. That's what love's got to do with it. And if you don't have a heart, life's not worth living.
How do you keep your heart open in hell?
Well, we're kind of in the 6 realms here. We know what hell is, though. But there are beings that are much worse off, no doubt about it. So, I think love is, has everything to do with it.
This is a random thing, but someone used to say God is in the details, and sometimes I think love is in the details. Like it's spring here, and the daffodils coming up, and the flowers coming out of the trees, and the buds, and the there's this heart opening quality, paying attention to the details.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's true. And, I'm not sure if they also say the devil is in the details too. I mean, everything's in the details. That's why we emphasize the details in the Buddhist world. We don't want to just lose that sense of particularity to things. Everything is very precisely what it is. That's part of our mode of really appreciating reality, fully so I agree with you. Basically.
But the Buddha, will have to find out what the Buddha said.
I can't. I mean, then there's loving kindness, metta.
Yeah. Metta.
Maybe radiating or projecting out a positive wish for others could be a kind of loving kindness, metta. They say the future Buddha is Maitreya Buddha, who was bodhisattva of loving kindness. Yeah. So maybe 300 years from now, if we can stick around, they say Maitreya is going to show up.
And in the meantime, we just have to keep coming back to the practice.
But invoke, you have to create a landing pad for a Buddha.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then it's an amazing thing. Obviously, the last one left a pretty big footprint.
Yeah. Compassion, patience, loving kindness for self and others.
Yeah. And the details.
Well, thank you so much. It's so brilliant to have these conversations with you and to hear your wisdom. And thanks to everybody who's out there is watching for being a part of this satsang and sangha, for being here tonight, making time. And always a big thank you to the people on the back end. We have lots of people that work to make this happen.